Hi everyone, it's Eileen from Now There's a Crafty Idea, and I just want to say happy Halloween. So this is a requested video. I mentioned a ghost story that I said I might read you one time, and it seems that you want to know the ghost story. So I've got a couple of ghost stories for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a little bit of a collage. I've been lucky enough to get some books from Germany and Greece and France, I think, and they're all old books. Many of them were falling apart when I actually got them, so yeah. I thought it would just make a different kind of collage, so I'm just going to do a text collage, and then I can always decorate it like later on. So let's just get to it. Okay, so this first story is one that I heard a long time ago for the first time, and then not so long ago, I hadn't heard it for a long time, and then not so long ago I heard it again, so I'm going to just tell you. So there was once, in a very far distant kingdom, a king who was greedy and selfish and mean-spirited, and he wasn't a nice person at all. And those people around him who knew him knew that whatever he wanted he took, or he stole, or he would buy, or he would find a way of owning whatever he wanted. Now in his castle lived a beautiful young girl. She was the most beautiful young woman in the whole kingdom, and everybody knew her for her beauty. And of course, seeing her beauty, this king decided that he wanted her to be his mistress, because she was the most beautiful, which meant that she was the best, and he would always have the best. So he decided that he wanted to have her as his mistress. But this young girl, this young woman, she was a very virtuous young woman, and she was already in love with a young man from the village. And she had planned that one day they would get married and they would have a lovely family, and none of that was going to happen if this horrible king got his way. So the king tried asking her, and she said no. So then he went on to try to bribe her. And as I said, this young woman was a virtuous young woman, and she said no again. So, knowing that he wouldn't be able to take her against her will, because that's not what he wanted to own her, not take her, he decided to trick her. Now this king had a very, very valuable collection of 10 plates, and these plates were beautiful and renowned throughout the kingdom as the finest plates that anyone had ever seen. This is a time when such fineries were very much sought after, and they really were worth a king's ransom. So he told the young maid that she would be personally in charge of these plates, and that should anything happen to them, she would be responsible. She would be held responsible. And so every night the young maid would go into the locked room, and she would count the plates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Once she'd counted the plates and realised they were all there, she could then go gladly to her bed, and she could rest easy. She held the key to the room, and nobody could steal the plates. And so this went on for a short while. Every night she would count them, and then lock the door and go to her bed. Now this was the king's plan, because there wasn't just one key to the room, there were 2 keys to the room, and the king had the other. Now the young maid didn't know this, and so one night she went to count the plates. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Only 9? The maid was terrified. She knew that she would be responsible for the lost plate. She searched the castle. She searched the castle grounds. She searched everywhere that she thought this plate might be. She asked the servants to help her. She asked the guards to help her. But she could not find the plate. And so she had to go to the Lord, the king, and tell him that one of the plates was gone. He played his part well and pretended to fly into a rage, and he had her locked up in a dungeon. And alone in the dark in the dungeon she wept, because having seen the king's face when she told him, she knew that he was the one who took the plate. And so the poor maid sat in the dark and the cold, weeping, terrified of what was going to happen to her, until the king came to her, and still pretending to be furious at the loss of his plate, he said to her, "I will forgive this if you will agree to be my mistress. The loss of the plate will be paid off with your virtue." Now, this maid, she was clever, and she knew that she'd been tricked. She was also very much a virtuous person, and refused, and told the king, "I cannot be yours. I will not be yours." And so the king grew very angry. He ordered the guards to take her straight out into the courtyard, where he ran her through with a sword and then had her thrown down the well. And so perished this poor maiden, whose only sin was to try to be a good person. And as he was a spoilt king, and he lost interest in the maiden, the king went back about his business and forgot all about the maiden, until the next night, when he was laying in bed asleep, and he was awoken by the sound of sloshing water. He was confused. What could that sound be? And then he heard in the dark, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then there was a blood-curdling scream. The guards rushed in and tried to find what had happened, tried to figure out what had gone on. And there in his bed, lying in a pool of blood, was the king holding his hand. And when they managed to pry his hands apart, the guards realised what the blood had come from. The king was missing a finger. The castle was searched, but no assailants were found. Now the king, he couldn't tell who had cut his finger off, because he hadn't seen. He'd only heard the counting in the night. But now he was scared. So that night the king went to bed with his sword by his side. And as he lay in the dark, he began to drowsily fall asleep, until he was suddenly woken by the sound of a sloshing water sound. and he could hear watery footsteps coming closer and closer. He began to shiver in his bed. He clutched his sword to him, and he knew that it was time to put an end to this. And then the counting started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again there was a blood-curdling scream, and the guards rushed in. And again the king lay in his bed, screaming in agony, holding his hand, missing yet another of his fingers. Now the king was absolutely terrified, and he knew what was happening. He knew that it was his retribution for what he had done to the maid, but still he didn't want to lose his fingers. So he had the well dredged, but nothing was found. No body, no young maid, nothing. He couldn't find her. Was she really dead? He'd run her through with his sword. And so came the third night. He had extra guards standing outside his door, and his best archer standing at the foot of his bed. There was no way that she was going to be able to come back and take another of his fingers, not this time. And so he lay there, awake and listening and waiting. And then he heard the footsteps again. Waterlogged footsteps, coming closer and closer. His nerve nearly broke, and he nearly ran from the room. But he knew that would not help. And so, counting on the strength of his men and the aim of his archer, he lay there waiting until the counting started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This time he didn't cry out. And when the guards came rushing in, they found him clutching his hand and yet another finger missing. He sat there weeping like a child. What can I do? What can I do to save myself from this? So the next day he sent his guards out to the furthest corners of his kingdom to try and find the wisest of people and ask them what he could do. All of them came to the castle, and one after another they shook their heads. None of them really knew what to do. Some of them said, smash all the plates. Some of them said, leave flowers for the girl. Some of them said, we should exercise the castle. So, wanting to make sure that he covered all the bases, he had the men, the wise men and women, do everything. Some of them cleansed the castle. Some of them smudged the area. Some of them brought fresh flowers and laid them all around the king's bedroom. And some of them went to get the plates, but the king stopped them. These plates were so precious he couldn't bear to be lost, to lose them. And so he wouldn't let them smash them. Now that night, the king's bedchamber was crowded with people. The king thought, if there are so many people here, she won't dare come near me. She won't dare. He sat up, surrounded by people, by wise men and women, by guards and by mercenaries. And he sat there in front of the fire. And they all waited with bated breath. And then suddenly they heard the footsteps. And then the counting started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nobody saw where she was. Nobody saw anybody approach the king. But there he sat with one less finger, weeping and crying. Nothing had worked. And so this went on for another 5 nights, until all that the king had left were 2 horrible stumps at the end of his arms and one last finger. On the last night, the wise men and women begged him to smash the plates. Smash them and throw them down the well. Let the maid have them. And so, fearing that he would lose every single one of his fingers, the king had the plates taken to the well, had them smashed and the pieces thrown down the well. And he prayed. For the first time in his life he prayed. He prayed for forgiveness. He prayed for help. He prayed for sanctuary. He had priests and vicars and holy men and women. He had nuns and monks. He had wise men and women. He had everybody surrounding him, praying for him, giving him advice. And he just sat there in his chair, waiting for the night to come. And in his heart he knew that nothing he'd done was really going to help. And so they all waited. And again they heard the footsteps. And again they approached the bedchamber. But this night there was no counting, because there was only one finger left. When the footsteps grew the closest, all of the candles in the room blew out. Everybody screamed in terror and ran around trying to find the candles, trying to light them, trying to bring some light. And when they did, there in his chair sat the king with a gruesome look on his face, no fingers left, and with his heart gone. He had taken the maid's life and she had taken his. And it said that on darkest nights in the castle you can still hear the counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I love that story. Gives me goosebumps every time I tell it. I hope you enjoy it. It's actually, I think, a Japanese story. Yeah, I love that story. I do love a good ghost story. Have you noticed the best ghost stories always have a moral? But it's just desserts. If he'd left the maid alone and taken no for an answer, he'd have kept all his fingers in his life. There's a few different versions of that story actually. In some, she's already his mistress and she betrays him. And in others, she's a spy and he finds out. I guess it depends on, you know, the political and economic climate of when it's being told and by who. I like that version the best though. I don't know how old the story is, but it is a good one. Now I have one more story if you're still interested, and I hope you are. And this one's not so long, it's a quick one. It's a bit tacky, let's change that out. This is turning out lovely, by the way. I love all the different text and dialects. I mean, I hope you can see that. We've got some English and some German and some Greek and some, I think that's French, I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, it's turning out lovely. And it's going to be nice when I cut it up into journaling cards. Once ago, in a little village somewhere in the middle of Europe, there was a clockmaker. And this clockmaker was renowned. His work was highly sought after. People came from far and wide to get one of his clocks. And he was very often commissioned to make clocks for the most famous of palaces. And so it came one day that this knight rode through. Having heard about the clockmaker, he demanded that he make him the best clock. He didn't want anything that was the same as anybody else's. He didn't want anything that the clockmaker had already made. He wanted the best clock in the kingdom. And he wanted the clockmaker to do it for him straight away. So the clockmaker, being used to people demanding of his time, set about making the most magnificent grandfather clock. It was ornately carved from beautiful walnut wood, and the gears and everything were made from the best gold, and the pendulum had a beautiful jewel encrusted into the centre of it. This clock was truly magnificent. When it chimed, little birds came out and tweeted around. It was a beautiful grandfather clock. And so he delivered it to this lord, to this knight. And the knight was absolutely in love with the clock, but he was a selfish man and a stingy man, and he didn't want to have to pay for the work. So he told the clockmaker that he didn't like it, that it was not what he ordered, but he'd keep it anyway. But he wasn't going to pay the clockmaker. The clockmaker said to him, "I have given you good work, sir, and you should pay me for that work, lest this clock sound for your downfall." Now this knight was a young man, and he didn't believe in old traditions. And he laughed in the face of the clockmaker and had him thrown out of his manor house. And it just so happened that that night a storm blew up, and the clockmaker was left out in the storm, having nowhere to go. He was far from his home, and he knew that he would never make it back through the storm. So he tried to find somewhere to shelter, but unfortunately it didn't work. Now the clock worked perfectly all evening. Tick tock, tick tock, perfectly. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, the clock stopped ticking. It just so happened that at 2 o'clock in the morning, the poor clock maker had frozen to death. This wasn't found until the next morning, and by that time the knight had grown impatient and angry that the clock wouldn't work, and so he kicked it viciously. The clock began to tick again. But at 2 o'clock the next morning, the clock stopped ticking. And because the ticking, tick-tock, tick-tock, was so loud, when it stopped ticking, it woke up the knight. Tick-tock, tick-tock. This went on for many nights. The knight couldn't sleep without the sound of the ticking, and the clock wouldn't tick past 2. And so the knight became very distressed, and he asked what should he do of his wisest advisors and friends. And they said, you should send the money to the clockmaker's family and apologise. But he was a bad-tempered man, and so he said, no, I will not pay for it. It doesn't even work properly. What a foolish man he was. And so on went the cycle. Tick tock, tick tock. 2 o'clock would come round. Tick, and it would stop. And on the morning, the knight would get up and he would kick the clock to make it start again. Every day this went on, until the knight became a shell of himself. Doctors were called in. They prescribed all sorts of medicines, but nothing seemed to help. And then one day, the clock didn't stop. Tick tock, tick tock. Past 2 o'clock, tick tock, tick tock. Past 3 o'clock, tick tock, tick tock. Finally, the knight woke up, realising that the clock hadn't stopped all night. He smiled to himself and thought, see, I knew it wouldn't stop all the time. I knew this was just superstition. It's fine. And so he got up to go about his day. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. He sat down to his breakfast, listening to the tick tock of the clock. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And just as he finished his breakfast and stood up, feeling very well in himself, the clock stopped. Tick tock, tick. Fearing that the knight would get angry and fly into one of his rages, one of the servants ran to the clock to kick it to make it start again. But the clock would not start, no matter how much they kicked at it. And eventually they realised the Lord hadn't said anything. The knight hadn't flown into a rage, even though the clock had stopped. So they went to look for him, and there they found him at the breakfast table, dead as a doornail. And the clock never ticked or tocked again. I like that one. Right, I'm just going to put down some of these. If you watched a previous video, I can't remember which one it was, I told you about how I did these. I just get the edge punch, I get a strip of paper, get the edge punch and go down it with the edge punch on both sides. Try and marry up the sides so that it's equal. And then I use these to put patterns on my papers. Because when I tea dye, I put them on the paper and then they leave the pattern of them on the paper. So I thought I would use them, they're nice and grungy, and I thought they would give a nice little dimension to this. So I'm going to put a couple of these on. So I hope that you enjoyed those stories. I did promise you scary stories, and it is Halloween, so I hope that was nice for Halloween anyway. I told you they wouldn't be too scary. I don't do too scary. I love scary stories though. I listen to a lot of podcasts and YouTube channels, and especially like ones with the best scary stories on. And like I say, I've got a lot of storyteller friends who tell stories and we share them. And usually at Halloween we have like a storyteller night. Obviously COVID, can't do that this year. Oh, that's a nice grungy side, I'll keep that side. So yeah, we were going to do it over Skype, but obviously I'm away. So even if they do it over Skype, I won't be able to be part of it. I'll be busy. But that's okay, because I'm going to Harry Potter World. Or I'll be in Harry Potter World when this comes out. That's right, I'm filming ahead so that I can go to Harry Potter World. I'm trying to get these videos done because I have so much stuff to do. Not only have I not packed and I'm going tomorrow, but I've got my sister coming to look after the house and the dog, so I've got to nip out to the shops and make sure there's plenty in. I mean, there is plenty in, but you know, you always get extra bits in when someone's coming to the house. And then I've just got a list of things I've got to do, so I'm liking that. I'm really liking that. I might put another one of them just there, just a little bit though, and then I think I'm going to call that done. And I love it, I love it, it's perfect. They really stand out against the text. I'm really liking that. Yep, very nice. Once that's all cut up, you're going to have bits of these. Yay, I love it. Yes. So I'm going to call it a video. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, please drop me a comment and tell me which one was your favourite. And again, if you like that kind of thing, I don't mind doing the odd storytelling and craft with me. If you enjoy it and you like it, then let me know, because I don't mind doing them. They're quite fun, and it's something different, isn't it? Because I think sometimes, you know, us YouTube crafters, we kind of sometimes run out of things to talk about, especially during COVID when there's not a lot going on, apart from times when you're pouring paint all over yourself. If you haven't read that or heard that one, then go back a video, because like you'll hear the whole story. But yeah, if you like that kind of thing, let me know and we can do more of it. Or if you don't, let me know and then I'll know, you know, not to do it. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I'm going to cut this, and maybe it's in one of the next videos we'll do something with them. I think these ones I'm going to put into the Ladybird journals. So yeah, that'll be fine. So happy Halloween, and stay safe and stay spooky.